We're releasing a video every single day in 2020. We're going to become the content kings of Canadian real estate.
What's going on YouTube, Facebook, and all of the platforms we're streaming from? My name is Rebecca Lynn Matheson, aka the Canadian Cottage Girl. And today on the Canadian Real Estate Channel, we have a very special guest. We have Hart from Rent Panda here, and we are going to be talking all about a few topics, including the things that I wish I knew before I became a landlord. And this is actually very fitting because I'm in my first real estate investment property right now. It's currently, we're going through the full renovations. It's a duplex project in Cambridge. So I'm sitting in one of the rooms in the duplex, just on the main floor here, where we've painted the whole room. We've got the new flooring in, and the project is really coming together. But I actually feel like this is a very fitting time to go through the topics of what I should know before I actually become a landlord. So you guys get to be here live with me and ask questions to Hart as we go. So I really want to encourage all of you to smash the like button if you like today's video, as well as ask your questions as we filter through all of this content. And I get an opportunity really just to sit here and pick Hart's brain, because he created this software called Rent Panda, which he created because his brother had essentially horrible experience as a renter, and really, and as a landlord himself. Hart just came from a wealth of knowledge and experience as a real estate investor, and really wanted to put everything all together to provide resources to both the tenants and the landlords to really pair them up together on this platform. It really reminds me actually of Airbnb, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love it. But before we actually get into really showing you the platform, because I do want to do that on today's live, I'm actually going to bring Hart onto this live so we can ask him questions together, because he's actually talked to over 2,000 landlords in building this platform, and it actually already has a membership base rocking and rolling, and is up live ready for you guys as landlords or first-time investors to actually sign up to and create your own property listing where you can be paired with tenants, or for a tenant to go on and find a property that they're looking to rent out. So I'm really excited actually to just bring Hart on. So let's do that. Hart, why don't you hop onto the call here, and we're just going to start asking away. We've got everyone coming into the room here live, and I'm really looking forward just to picking Hart's brain with all of you. So let's bring Hart on.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi, Hart. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm also amidst renovations in my place here, but everything else is going good. I'm excited to be here tonight.
Love it. Guys, you're going to laugh. I literally have my laptop on a ladder right now with my ring light off to the side. So it is the primo renovation setup. So Hart, first of all, welcome to the Canadian Real Estate Channel. I know that you've pumped out a few videos here on the channel, and there will be more to come. So guys, make sure you actually check out Hart's playlist on the Canadian Real Estate Channel, where you'll be able to actually go through and binge watch all of the content from Hart and Rent Panda. Today, we actually have the opportunity to go through and ask a bunch of questions, but I know, Hart, that you also have a few friends that you're going to bring on. So we'll be able to phone a friend here on this live. And one of them is actually a paralegal. So guys, make sure that you stay tuned right to the end of this live video, because you're going to get an opportunity not only to ask myself and Hart questions about things that you need to know before you become a landlord, but there will also be a paralegal on the call to talk about broad, general kind of landlord tenant board situations and answer questions for you guys. So let's just start. I actually have some questions, so I'm going to start by asking my questions, and then as guys, everyone viewing this video today, as questions pop into your heads or comments, make sure that you throw them into the comment section so that we can actually ask them to Hart here live on the channel, and just make sure that you get them all here out of the way. Before we do that though, Hart, I'd actually love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the Rent Panda platform and what it is exactly that the platform services. I know I introduce yourself.
Awesome. Looks like I lost you there for a second, but you're back now, Rebecca. So as you said, I'm one of the two co-founders of Rent Panda, and my brother and I really started this business because of our own renting experiences. We started the business up in Thunder Bay almost 5 years ago now, and it was really bred from a situation where there weren't a lot of platforms to list on. There weren't a lot of good services that were available for landlords or for tenants. And we thought that we could build something better, kind of akin to Airbnb, like you said. You know, before Airbnb, there wasn't a lot out there to list your vacation rental and to find vacation rentals. And we thought that the same innovation could be had in the rental industry. And so we built Rent Panda to really be a one-stop shop platform for landlords to go sign up for free, be able to experience a primarily free platform that can take them all the way from listing through to lease, to really solve the pain point of finding a good tenant. Because when you're going to buy a property, you know, you've got a lot of people in suits and ties looking to service you and help you find that great rental property. But when it comes to renting, you're kind of left on your own. And the process of posting your property, of marketing it, of screening tenants, of building leases, you were kind of left to the world of Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace. And so really what Rent Panda is that one-stop platform where you can list your property, you can message tenants, you can see their profiles before booking showings, you can choose and be selective of who you do showings with. And then once you've done those showings, you can actually get credit checks and background checks and properly screen that tenant in order to make the right decision. And then you can actually build your lease with a lease appendix all for free on the platform. So you can really go from listing through to lease in one fell swoop. And I know we just did a video about how to do that. Maybe we cracked the 5-minute mark, but it shouldn't take very long to go from listing all the way through to lease if you've got one awesome platform. And as you mentioned, we've talked to well over 2,000 landlords, and we're constantly building. And so every bit of feedback that we get about a landlord's experience incentivizes us to build more, to innovate more, and really informs where we take this company. You know, it's built by landlords for landlords. And even though it sounds a bit cliche and cheesy, it is really true. Every bit of feedback that we get, we implement into building new tools for landlords.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, now that you've kind of gone through your introduction, I'd actually love it if I could share with everyone what your platform looks like real quick, and then
Sure.
let's get into the live question and answer. So I'm just gonna share my screen here, guys, so hopefully you can see this. Just give me that confirmation once you can, Hart.
All good.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this is actually the website here, Rent Panda, and there will be a full video that we release on the Canadian Real Estate channel where Hart actually takes me through a little introduction on how to list your property as a landlord. So I'm just gonna go to the dashboard. So this is actually the exact property that we did as a little tester here with some fantastic photos, just details about the project or the property that you're, the description pre-gen. generated, where you can actually message the potential tenants that you're looking to actually get into your property and book showings. You can actually get the lease generated right on the platform. So it's quite cool. I definitely recommend just going and signing up for the platform if you do have a property right now that you're looking to actually rent out. But before we just kind of mention that we're going to go through a live question and answer. So I really encourage you guys to use this opportunity to leverage the knowledge of others in this live question and answer, and ask away any questions that you have about becoming a landlord, or really those top items that are kind of lingering on your mind where you're wondering what the next steps are. And again, this is actually perfect timing. I'm sitting in my rental unit right now. It's not quite a rental yet. We're still in the midst of renovating. So we've done all of the kind of luxury vinyl plank flooring. We've got a nice alabaster white in behind me. So all of the basic clean cut finishes here, which there is a whole video on that Hart recommends that kind of renovations that you should do to get the most bang for your buck in terms of the price point that you would be charging for rent. Now, that's actually my first question here for you, Hart, is like, how do I know what I should charge for rent, and what's the best way to figure that out for the market? So let's use my property as an example. So I'm here in Cambridge. Let's call it one of the units is a 3-bed, 1-bath unit. How do I know what I should charge?
Yeah, that's a really key question. It's kind of the holy grail question that every landlord, probably of the 2,000 that I've spoken to, 1,999 have asked. And it's the same when you're buying and selling a property too. But the first question to ask yourself before what are you looking to charge in rent is really, who are you building that property for? And your example is perfect in that you're taking a property from the ground up. You're really renovating with a tenant in mind. And so the first question is, who's in your mind with that property? Is it going to be a young family that's coming through? Is it a student rental? Is it a bunch of young professionals who are moving out from Toronto to get out of the city and love Cambridge and the feel that it has? And really analyzing who you're building for, because each individual person, each individual category of tenants is going to be different in terms of what they're looking for and how you should position not only your renovations and your property, but also your write-up, what platform to use. But it'll give you a sense of what their other comparables are that they're going to be looking to rent and what kind of budget level they have. So I'll actually ask you, like, who do you think is going to be attracted to your property in Cambridge?
Sure, great question. I would say it could be a mix of a lot of different people. I'd say Cambridge is in this area in Cambridge. It's actually centrally kind of located it's Preston. So it's located between Kitchener and Cambridge. So
Yep.
it could be somebody a working professional, ideally, who wants to commute to Kitchener or with a short drive, somebody who maybe is in the area, but I would say definitely somebody who's clean. They are going to pay the rent on time, and ideally take care of the place, and have good income. So that would be the ideal tenant, really. And I'm sure that's most people's ideal tenant.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, this wasn't pre-planned, but that's the perfect typical answer that landlords often give, in that every landlord is going to want, someone clean who's going to not damage the place, who's going to pay rent, because ultimately that means you've got a good ROI coming through, right? Like all your numbers that you've meticulously planned are going to hit, your vacancy rate numbers, your repair budgets, all of those are going to be in line with what you expect. But I would say digging a little bit deeper is kind of the first step, and saying, if it is truly young professionals, that 3-bedroom unit that you're building, is it, a main bedroom with a home office and a gym because, it's a young affluent professional who's maybe commuting to Kitchener or Toronto, and, the same place in Toronto, they could get a 1-bedroom tiny little unit, and now they're coming out to Cambridge and they can afford that full 3-bedroom home? Or is it more realistic within that neighborhood that you're actually going to be getting, a local family who's a young family who has stable income, who may still, take care of the place and pay rent on time, but they're going to be filling all those rooms as bedrooms. Maybe their income level is a little bit lower for those luxury items, but it's a typical family home. And that's kind of the questions that you want to really dig into so that you can look at comparables. Because in this market that we're dealing with COVID, since 2.5 years ago when this all started, you have a lot of migration out of Toronto to some smaller cities, and you have this new burgeoning sector of like luxury rentals essentially that are available because young professionals would have been paying $2,800 to $4,000 a month for a half decent 2 or 3 bedroom place in Toronto. Now they're coming out, and you may actually be able to charge $3,000 a month for that 3 bedroom in Cambridge. Whereas if you were looking at it more so as a comparable for a family home, maybe it's more so in like the $2,400 to $2,600 range. So really pinpointing who that ideal tenant is going to help you along the way. But once you do have that pinpointed ideal tenant, you want to look at your comparables. So directly other 3 bedrooms that are currently available or have recently been rented on various platforms, as well as other comparables. So, if it is other 4 bedroom homes, maybe just outside of the core and a little bit more rural, or maybe it's 2 bedroom places because people will really cram in together in a slightly more desirable area, and check comparables there. And I'd say doing your due diligence and really looking at all of the platforms is key, because unfortunately Rent Panda isn't the only one. Kijiji isn't the only one. Facebook Marketplace isn't the only one. And because there's no aggregated center, you want to be able to look at multiple platforms and build a list for yourself of comparables and really see where your place can land. And then a couple kind of watch outs is a lot of people will take a look at MLS, and it is a decent source to look at. But typically those who are going to be using realtors to just post on MLS may be in the higher price bracket. So I take those with a grain of salt as kind of the top end of your comparables. And then a lot of people will look at CMHC actually as their rental data, or something like rentals.ca, who reports on a monthly basis what rentals are going for in that area. And I would say that there's a fundamental flaw with CMHC or rental.ca data in that the category or the subset of data that they're looking at is really, really small. So rentals.ca will say that a 3 bedroom in Cambridge is actually going for $2,100 a month because there's only 3 bedrooms in Cambridge that they've had on the platform in the last 3 months. CMHC, on the other hand, does a survey of purpose-built apartment units or purpose-built rentals of 4 units or more. And so 1 bedrooms may be heavily skewed to high-rises or mid-rise apartment buildings, of which there's not a ton in Cambridge. And so if you have a 1-bedroom basement apartment, the numbers are going to be quite skewed. And so unfortunately, the answer to the question is do all of your due diligence by looking at multiple platforms, make a list for yourself, and really question, who that ideal tenant is that's coming through the platform and where your place lies on the spectrum. Obviously being realistic with the money that you put into your reno, what you need in order to bring positive cash flow or just good return on your investment, and make sure that that aligns with your investment goals as well as, the true rental market.
Awesome. Now, if I were to decide to actually pursue putting tenants into this property, how long would it take to actually find a tenant typically? So let's say that I finish the renos and decide that I do want tenants and that I do want to rent it out. How long should I expect that process to take?
Yeah, it's a good idea to allocate 2 to 4 weeks realistically going through the actual process of renting. But oftentimes landlords will mistakenly say, how long is it going to take to get a tenant in? And what they're actually thinking is, what date is that tenant going to move in for? And so, it's April 6th right now. A lot of landlords will be like, I need someone by May 1st, which is a realistic goal because, it could take a week or 2 to get through the process. And placing someone for May 1st is realistic. But a lot of landlords will fall prey to their own desire to just place someone really quickly. And if it's April 21st and we say, it may take a week or 2 to place someone, they think, great, I can get someone in for May 1st. And although you may be able to, one thing that we often advise landlords to caution is, do you really want to be renting to someone who you found on April 26th or 27th, who can move in May 1st? And the answer may be yes or no. Again, in COVID these days, a lot of people have moved back in with parents, are cohabiting, and moving in a couple of days is normal. But in our pre-COVID world, and in most instances, you want to make sure that that tenant is a good tenant to their current landlord and is giving them proper notice. So you don't want someone that's going to screw their old landlord to get into your place, because it's a bit indicative of how they're going to treat you as a landlord too. So generally, to be safe, you want to build in your month's vacancy into your calculations. Roughly, let's call it 4% a month as a vacancy cost with your calculations, or a month rent, or a month vacant every kind of 2 years within that rental. But you want to make sure that you leave yourself enough time within the month to actually place someone, knowing that most tenants will have to give notice to their previous landlord. And you want to make sure that that tenant is good, which is an indicator of, treating an old landlord respectfully.
Got it. Yeah, and that could be a really good line item too, to make sure you budget for, is ensure that you actually have a few months that you can go without having that filled, just to make sure you actually put the right person in there. Because I'm sure we've all seen the nightmare reality TV shows of love at first sight. It rarely works out. Make sure you spend some time to actually go through and properly vet the tenant. That sounds like a better idea.
We've seen a lot of cash flow
next
projections. Oops, sorry. Yeah, we've seen a lot of cash flow projections that don't have vacancy cost built in there. And, people think that they're having awesome cash flow, and all of a sudden, it takes an extra couple weeks or an extra month to place that tenant in there. And an entire month of positive cash flow is out the window.
Right. Yes, that makes sense. Okay, so if I were to actually get a list of people who are interested in renting, they reach out, I post it, however that looks, what should I actually ask people? What are the typical questions that most landlords ask, or how do you actually identify if they're going to be a good tenant?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I'd say that there's a lot of digital tools out there that will help with the screening process. But there's an element to landlording that boils down to being human, right? And ultimately, as we've talked about before, it's a relationship that you're starting out, and you want to really dive into some questions that will reveal people's nature, as opposed to just diving right in and saying, how much do you make a month? And give me your last landlord's information. And I need an employment letter. And if you're a student, I need a guarantor. We want to make sure that we're diving into more of that human element of how that person's going to be as a tenant for you. So one thing that we'd love to ask, and that we advise landlords to ask, is really what the tenant is looking for in a home. So even at the start of the conversation, if someone's messaged you on Rent Panda or Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace, just ask them what they're looking for in a rental. And that'll usually reverse engineer a lot of the questions that you would otherwise have asked. They'll tell you, what they're looking for in terms of the size of the home, a little bit about their family, a little bit about why they're actually moving. And if they don't reveal that information, it's just that nice conversational starter to say, what are you looking for in a home? And then diving into what you as a landlord are looking for in a tenant. You want to ask them, where they're currently living and why they're looking to move. Again, you want to get conversational answers as opposed to one-word answers or quantitative data. You want to pull out that qualitative sense of why someone is truly moving. Maybe it's the neighborhood. Maybe they say that, they're adopting 3 dogs and they really want yard space, or across the street from awesome parks and ravines and whatnot. So those open-ended questions are always much better than finite single-word answers. And then you obviously want to dive into more of the employment side, and generally where their income is coming from. And you can do that in a softer way. You can talk about, what they like to do for a living, what they do in their off time, and then what they do for work, what the other members of the household do as hobbies, as work, and just have more of a conversational sense. And if that tenant does get through to the end, you've already started off on a really good human foot, and it doesn't feel like a contentious relationship between a police officer grilling you about your questions. It puts everyone in a much more comfortable space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I imagine many landlords that you have dealt with have had nightmare experiences. So
Yeah.
I know that you brought a friend along today. So let's actually bring your friend into the live. So Dan, come on to our live. We have Dan, the paralegal, who is going to join us. Dan, welcome to the Canadian Real Estate Channel.
Thank you so much. I'm really stoked about being here with you guys tonight.
Awesome. So
Absolutely. Well, Dan, why don't you give us a little intro of yourself, and Hart, you can even intro Dan or just give a little bit of context. And that way we can kind of ask away some paralegal type questions and go through all of those scenarios. And guys, anyone listening right now who is on this live, I highly, highly encourage you just to throw some love in the comment section below. Ask your questions away. Otherwise, I'm going to keep asking all the questions, which I'm okay with because I'm learning lots. So, guys, make sure that you throw some love, say hi, let us know that you're here. And yeah, Dan, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much. So again, my name is Dan Schofield. I'm a senior litigator with SFG Paralegal Services located in Richmond Hill, Ontario. We were founded 10 years ago by Samantha Glass. Our website information is sfg.legal. Just to give you some understanding of who we are as a firm, we are a paralegal firm. We currently have 700 active landlord and tenant board files. We have 11 litigators and support staff to answer and help our clients' needs. And we are very excited to be here. And Hart, one of the things that you were talking about while I was backstage was allowing time to find a new tenant. Well, I give this advice to my landlords as well. Currently, it can take anywhere from 8 months to 10 months to evict a bad tenant. So sometimes it's better to spend a little bit of time on the front end using Rent Panda to find a decent tenant who is going to pay their rent because it will certainly save you money in the long run.
awesome. Cool. And Dan, I think that's a perfect foray into all of the negative situations that do come up. Unfortunately, landlords sometimes get into situations where tenants aren't following through with what they promised, or sometimes, a lease isn't written properly and it leaves some ambiguity out there. Something that we get asked a lot and is kind of upon us now as spring is coming. But a lot of landlords put it on the tenants to take care of lawn and snow. And we've seen a lot of landlords who complain because the tenant actually stops taking care of the lawn. Neighbors call bylaw, and now the landlord is getting called about a lack of bylaw being adhered to. So what would your advice be for landlords that are getting calls from bylaw and the lawn isn't being taken care of anymore?
So I really wish that there was a mechanism that would allow you within the tenancy agreement to assign lawn and snow removal to tenants. Unfortunately, there isn't. You can have a separate contractual agreement with the tenant that says you are agreeing to pay them $100 or $200 a month to take care of snow and lawn removal, which is outside the landlord and tenant relationship. And it would allow them to do that. But I'm going to tell you what I tell my clients: build it in to the rent and just take care of it yourself. Then it's always done. You'd never have to worry about bylaw knocking about lawn that's too long. In the snow, we are in Canada. We're covered in snow, more than we're not. So we don't have to worry about ice and slip and falls and Occupiers Liability Act and issues that may arise from it. Especially if you're in a unit that houses more than one tenant. So if you're in a duplex, either a basement or an upper or side by side, you don't want the negligence of one tenant to cause you to be sued by another. So either have a separate agreement or build it into the rent. Charge an extra $100, $150 a month and have somebody come and do it. Those would be my suggestions.
Cool. Yeah, and I think it's a perfect answer and something that we advise landlords to do all the time. And just for context, for those people that are wondering, why there's a paralegal here in conjunction with a rental platform and the Canadian Real Estate Channel, and really what we're trying to do is bring together a community that can support landlords. And Rent Panda is doing this on our platform. SFG has been doing this for a long time, and obviously the Canadian Real Estate Channel too. But the more people that can get together and support each other from a landlord community perspective, the better off we'll be. And experts like Dan can help us all steer clear of a lot of problems that we can encounter. And I think the biggest one that let's just address right off the bat is, what should a tenant or what should a landlord do if a tenant stops paying rent? So, you know, the 2nd comes up. We're at the 6th right now, but April 2nd hits, and a tenant hasn't paid rent, whether they have a history of not paying rent or not. What's kind of the first thing that a landlord should do in the process that they should take with you, Dan?
So, Hart, that's a great question. So we still, to this day, have landlords who come into our office, or not come into our office anymore, but do virtual consultations with us, where they are 2, 3, sometimes 4 months behind on rent. And it's always the same story. Well, the tenant didn't pay, but the tenant told me that they would catch up. And then I made a payment arrangement with the tenant, and they paid it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they didn't pay. SFG does business anywhere from small landlords with 1 door all the way up to property managers with 2,000, 2,500 doors. And I'm going to tell you, our recommendation is always, if rent is due on the 1st at 12:01 a.m. on the 2nd, that N4 should be ready. The tenant has many opportunities to void that. They can pay it within the 14 days. After the 14 days, once you've already filed it with the board, they can pay it up to the date of the hearing. After the hearing, they're going to, and the order is received, there's going to be another 11 days that the tenant can pay any arrears. They can enter into a payment agreement with you at any time between the time that the notice is served up to the time that you are done at the board. This is a business, and you kind of, unfortunately, it sounds heartless, but you have to check your heart at the door. Once the notice is served, you can move through the process. You know, prior to COVID, you know, maybe it would take you 3 months, 90 days to get through the process, start to finish. Now it's going to take you 9 months. You know, just to give you an example of what our clients are currently experiencing, N4 is served, tenant's given 14 days to void. Tenant doesn't void, we file the L1 application. Within 2 to 3 months, we receive the notice of hearing, which is usually another 2 months away. So now we're at 5 months. Then you have the hearing. The adjudicators right now are taking anywhere between 2 and 3 months to generate the order from the hearing. So now you're at 8 months. They're going to get an 11-day voidable order. So now you're at 8.5 to almost 9 months. Then you're going to file that order with the sheriff. The sheriff is backlogged 6 to 8 weeks. Now you're at, you know, 11 to 12 months for something. So do you really want that process to be delayed 4 months? So now you're, instead of 12 months behind, you're 15 months or 16 months behind. If rent is due on the 1st at 12:01 a.m. the next day, that N4 should be ready to be served.
Right. And we have a lot of landlords that come to us and say, well, I didn't serve the N4 because I live out of town and I didn't want to drive over and drop the N4 in my tenant's mailbox or slip it under the door. So maybe shed some light on us as to how a notice should be properly served and kind of what the landlord tenant board is allowing or not allowing these days.
So everybody thinks that it's a magic trick. Canada Post service is the only method of service that the landlord and tenant board says is deemed to be served after 5 days. So yes, you're adding 5 days to any termination date, not including the day that it's served. You're delaying your ability to file whatever notice that is by 5 days. But the reality is that if the tenant comes to the board and says, I never received the notice, the member is going to look at your certificate of service. They're going to say, oh, you served this by mail. Who served it by mail? Oh, the paralegal served it by mail. They're here. They certified that they served it. Tenant, Canada Post gets it right 99.5% of the time. So we're going to just say that this was deemed served after 5 days. Let's move on and deal with the substance of the claim. When you start talking about Canada Post signature, okay, well, yeah, it's secure, but if they never pick it up, they were never served. Canada, email. Email went in my spam. It never came to my attention. Just do Canada Post. Save yourself a lot of time, a lot of heartache. That 5 days in the scheme of things is nothing, and it gives you some security.
Right. So have stamps on hand at all times.
Have stamps, and by the way, any licensee can serve that for you. So if you live out of town, you don't need to drive.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's actually very important to note, because I think a lot of people expect that they need to actually like physically like hand a copy and like serve a notice, but it sounds like by mail is actually trackable. So that makes a lot of sense.
People who aren't involved in the litigation process often think that, you know, you have to disguise yourself as the pizza delivery guy and you have to put the notice in the box and, oh, you're served, because they see that in movies. But in reality, that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
Got it. I have a question as well for either Dan or Hart, but I guess, do you have any examples of, I guess, nightmare scenarios that a landlord has dealt with that you've kind of been a part of that you could, I guess, prevent, or a landlord could prevent that getting into that situation in the first place? So going along the topic of things I wish I knew before I became a landlord, like, what is the worst thing that you've ever seen?
Dan, you probably have a lot of horror stories, so I'll let you go first.
Well, first, let me say that one of the reasons we aligned with Rent Panda is because the best way to avoid those situations is to screen.
Yes.
The if you name it, we've probably seen it. I mean, non-paying tenants, they're damaging the property. A lot of tenants who have been in a property for a long period of time, in their mind, almost believe that it's theirs and they can treat it as they want. So they hoard, they do various things. I mean, I've had everything from, you know, dead cats in a bedroom to, you know, fire hazards to tenants, you know, requiring police intervention for a basic inspection. I mean, the list is too long, and quite honestly, most of you probably wouldn't believe me if I told you some of the scenarios that we run into, but just screen, and react quickly. That's probably the best way I can say nightmare scenario and how to deal with it.
Yeah, I would say a similar thing. And I think kind of counterintuitively, the most nightmarish thing that we've seen, especially going in and doing photography for people early on in our Rent Panda days, as well as now when we do leasing work for landlords, is really seeing a completely renovated place that looks absolutely brand new. And we're shocked, and the place looks amazing. And we think that the landlord has invested a great deal and they're awesome landlords, only to find out that the place has been gutted because of a bad choice of tenant or a bad fit or a bad situation that was made worse because of a lack of landlord and tenant education. So we've seen places that have literally been ripped back to the studs because of all of the various things that Dan just said. And a landlord being out 50, 60, 80, $100,000 easily with a bad tenant experience. And really what we're trying to push forward is that semblance of community, but also education on both the landlord and tenant side. And Rebecca, you and I have talked about this a lot, but you know, the job of being a landlord is the job of being a matchmaker, and you're trying to find the perfect match for your unit. And if you find that perfect match, it's a ring on your finger, it's a match made in heaven. But if not, it can be a really, really messy breakup. And with any messy breakup, it usually ends in a lawyer, which is why Dan is here too. So we've seen a lot, but the underscore of it all is just education and due diligence, and investing the time up front will avoid the majority of situations.
Got it. Now, while I have you both here, I want to know what clauses should actually go into a lease agreement to prevent some of these things from happening.
Yeah, for sure. I'll talk about a couple and then pitch it over to Dan because he's probably got a couple more. But one thing that landlords often assume when they find out that there is an Ontario standard lease that was implemented that they need to use, which surprisingly a lot of landlords still don't know. But when they find that out, they assume that because it is an Ontario standard lease from the government, then they're set. They just need to fill that lease out and everything is clean and simple. But the reality is that there is a lease appendix that you should be tacking on to your lease that contains a lot of clauses that are either specific to your unit or just generally should be in a lease in order to deal with possible complicated situations that arise. So some of the more oddball ones that we see, the short-term rental clause is one that comes up often. And, you know, Airbnb arbitrage has been something that's come up a lot in the real estate investment world as a way to make money. But oftentimes landlords don't want tenants renting their place out as a short-term rental. And so putting stipulations around what can and can't be done and what things the landlord needs to approve or can be done without their approval is really important. And then small things like parking arrangements. A lot of tenant disputes will occur, which is a huge problem for landlords. If you have a duplex or a fourplex, parking disputes often are the end of tenancies and where things fall apart. And so having the parking arrangement actually set out in the lease appendix, or things like garbage disposal, those are kind of standard that you should have in there. And then one really oddball one is actually what to do in the case of a death of a tenant. And most landlords don't think about this as ever happening. But the reality is if you're a landlord long enough, unfortunately, it is a situation that arises more often than not. And you need to have a clause in that lease to outline what happens after the death of a tenant. Who assumes that rent charge, how long does that live for? And mostly it's just to avoid, awkward situations or any kind of disputes that may happen in that case between an estate and a landlord, and really, save you in terms of potential unpaid rent. So those are kind of my categories. Hope I didn't steal too many from you, Dan.
Got it.
So I focus mainly when it comes to leases. I look at one, like Hart said, have some specificity. Like, you can't put a pool in the backyard. I mean, the reality is you can't put a pool in the backyard anyway, but it's a lot easier to say it in the lease so that you have a document that you can point to that said, I specifically told you no pools in the backyard. I also like to get consents to run credit checks, consents to run, any AKA information, so that if, knock on wood, the tenancy does go sideways, you have permission to report to Equifax, you have permission to pull credit reports, you have permissions to do other sort of reference checks. Is there somebody that we can call? If you don't have those things, we can still skip trace and we can still enforce and we can still do other things. But it's a whole lot easier if you have that consented to. I would suggest that, people are using the Ontario Standard Lease, and then they put an addendum that has all the illegal clauses that the Ontario Standard Lease says that you can't do. Don't do that. I mean, it's just a waste of time. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm a tenant. I'm currently looking for other places, and I actually walked away from a place because the landlord used the Ontario Standard Lease and then put an amendment on the Ontario Standard Lease that said a bunch of illegal things. And I just kind of had to sit there and say to myself, look, I'm going to be paying this guy $3,000 a month of my hard-earned money. Do I really want to start a relationship with a landlord who is obviously ignorant of what their responsibilities are, and how is that going to play into my daily life? And if I feel that way, I'm sure other people feel that way as well. So just for a level of comfort, I would highly suggest that you make addendums to your lease that are legally enforceable and that are just hitting home specifics.
Yep. And use the Rent Panda package, consult with a paralegal, go to an expert if you don't know what is legal or illegal, because there are resources out there that you can turn to as a landlord.
And if I could just say this,
oh yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I just want to say this as well. The University of Facebook and Google is wrong 90% of the time. So please rely on the experts. Most of us will give you free consultations and give you the right information from the get-go.
Love that. Well, I believe we actually have a question and kind of comment here in the chat. So let's just pull that up here. So we have from Kyler Brown. Hello, how are you? We have a question / comment that is regulation in Ontario has completely discouraged me from investing. Even though I have had good experience with tenants, the worst case scenario is dealing with damage or non-payment. Makes it too risky. That is, I think, an important topic to discuss. Do you guys have any thoughts on Kyler's statement here?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely use the Canadian Real Estate Channel as a resource and go back on some videos that that show that the endeavor isn't necessarily too risky, and that there are systems out there that you can follow to mitigate the risk. And so, not beating around the bush. Yes, the Residential Tenancies Act is biased towards a tenant, and yes, the Landlord-Tenant Board has wait times, like Dan said, of 10 to 16 months, depending on the case, obviously. But mitigating your risk is possible out there with the right tools and the right systems. But you need to look at landlording as a business. And a lot of landlords make the mistake to just jump into landlording because they think it is going to be a passive income stream. And it's definitely not passive until you get to a point, or if you choose to push it off to a property manager, or they think it's just going to be a little nest egg that they can sit on until retirement and have 2, 3, 4, 5 properties. And the reality is it's a very active investment, especially when you start real estate investing and when you start becoming a landlord. And good landlords, like good business owners, need to invest early. So you may be in the hole for a little while in investing in education for yourself, building that network around you who can support you if things turn badly, hiring the right experts to do things right from the start. There are definitely ways to stay safe in real estate investing. I think it's why we're all in this game now, is because we believe that there is still some safety to it, and it is still a good way to invest our money. But you need to look at it as a business first, and all of the success will come later.
Yeah, I think that's that pretty much addresses it. We have another question here in the chat, but before we get to that, I actually have a question. So I know that they're in that even example that we went through on the Rent Panda platform, as well to answer and kind of comment on that kind of statement that came in is maybe use a service like Rent Panda to help find good tenants and not run into all of the nightmares. But I do actually have a question. So with a standard lease, you can either do a set period of time, so like a year lease, or you can do month to month. What are the actual differences from a legality standpoint, from the landlord's perspective? What is the actual difference between the lease agreement, and does that impact whether or not you can change that tenant over if you've got a nightmare tenant, or what implications does that have from even the tenant's perspective as well?
So if I may answer that, Hart.
Yeah.
So firstly, it's important to discuss the fact that regardless of a month-to-month or a yearly tenant, it takes the same amount of time to evict them. Now, when you look at the actual month-to-month tenancy versus yearly, on an annual tenancy, there's probably 3 or 4 different sections of the act that would allow a tenant to terminate their lease early with no penalty to them. Most of the time, that would be an assignment or a sublet agreement with the landlord. Most landlords refuse, so most of the time those tenancies end. What you're doing by having a yearly tenancy or yearly renewals, even though leases tend to go month to month, is you are basically preventing yourself from capitalizing on your investment if you want to sell during that time. On a month-to-month tenancy, you only are required to provide the requisite notice in regards to selling. The pitfalls of serving an N12, and then you have to wait for a hearing, and then you have to do the hearing, those all exist regardless. But you have the flexibility on a month-to-month to sell or to treat the property in some way, transfer it or do something in another way, and not have to wait for a period of time. Having said that, my personal opinion as somebody in the legal profession is a yearly tenancy should probably be more of a reward for good behavior. Mr. Tenant, you pay your rent on time. You don't damage my spot. You've been doing good for me. So in exchange, I'll do good for you, and I'll give you this security that I'm not going to do anything with my property for the next year. That's how I personally would use it. But legally, there's really no difference on how the board treats notices or issues with tenants.
Yeah. And the only thing to add there, as a landlord and having spoken to a lot of landlords, is that oftentimes, regardless of the true legal implications of having one or the other. The only benefit of the year-long lease is the perception of tenants who aren't educated in their ability to get out of that tenancy through sublet or assignment is generally them wanting to get to the end of that year, or feeling bad about attempting to end that lease early and being more lenient about move-in dates, or waiting until you found someone to fill that property, or even getting to the point of offering, a month's payment in terms of a penalty, and offering that up voluntarily. But that being said, is Dan's completely right. In terms of the legal dotted line, there isn't much of a benefit to the landlord. But from a perception perspective, tenants still have that perception that they have to stay for that year. And it can sometimes be advantageous to a landlord in that situation.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the context there. I've always wondered what the differences are in terms of the actual practicality, because you see a lot of landlords going for that year lease when they first start. So I definitely have always wondered that. So thank you for answering. Okay, next question here we just have in the chat function. We'll just pull that up here. So we have a question from C26CA, and it is, how different are tenant and owner laws across Canada? So that is federal or provincial / municipal. So I know we, in this call anyways, are all dealing in Ontario. So I'm sure we can speak to Ontario, but if either of you have any contextual details about some of the other provinces, we can maybe toss those in here too. But even if there are any differences between municipalities, I would love to hear that. So thank you for the question, C26CA.
Awesome. I'll just say the blanket statement as a real estate investor myself, in that being a landlord in Ontario, we're governed by the Residential Tenancies Act. We have to use the Ontario Standard Lease. The only real municipal difference that I experience as a landlord, and that landlords that we speak to experience, are really based on municipal bylaws. And not a lot of that affects, the Ontario Standard Lease. It may affect some clauses that you put in there, like lawn and snow care, like what you can actually include in a lease in terms of what a tenant can install in the place, like Dan was saying earlier, with putting a pool in the backyard or whatnot. But there's not a lot of municipal guidelines there. And then in terms of federal differences, every province is very, very different. There's lots of videos on the channel about investing in the East Coast, investing out in Alberta. And so landlords go through much different rigor and different tenancies acts in terms of their experiences out there.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely appreciate the context there. If anyone has any more questions, we'll take that now, and then we're going to wrap up here shortly. So if anyone does have any questions, just toss those into the comments section below. But I do have a question while we're kind of finding out if there are any more questions. So in regards to just that setup of actually issuing notices, I know you mentioned for not tenants that aren't paying, and you kind of briefly touched on, if you are to sell your property as a landlord, what the process is for issuing notices. So for on a month-to-month lease agreement, you can issue those notices right away, but a yearly lease agreement, you're unable to. And does the buyer at that point just assume the tenant, or you negotiate with that tenant if the buyer wants the property vacant on possession, or what is the typical process there from a landlord perspective for selling the property, and what is the appropriate way to approach that as a brand new landlord getting into it who decides to sell their property?
Well, firstly, let me say that 99% of the times I see a purchaser's own use application go sideways, it is because of an inexperienced realtor who doesn't understand real estate investing, who took that deal over and made promises that they simply can't make. So let me be really, really super clear. So on a purchaser's own use application, if the tenant is on a lease, the termination date on the notice cannot be before the end of the lease period. You can still serve it, but you can't terminate before the end of the lease. And it has to be at least 60 days. On a month to month, it's 60 days, at least 60 days. There's some caveats at the end of a rental period, various things. Compensation has to be paid by the termination date. Understand, first of all, that serving the notice does not trigger an obligation on the tenant to leave. It says right on the notice, if you disagree with this notice, you don't have to leave. So you need to make sure that that notice is filed with the landlord and tenant board right away in order to ensure that you have a hearing sooner. If you are a seller of a investment property, you want to be sure that the purchaser is going to include in the purchase and sale agreement that they intend to live in the unit themselves and that they are going to swear an affidavit or give a declaration that says just that. A corporation cannot occupy a residential home. And the tenant ultimately has security of tenure. So you can't evict them just simply because the purchase and sale agreement says vacant possession. There has to be some work there, which is why it's extremely important to have a real estate agent that is well versed in Ontario rentals and how to sell Ontario rentals. After that, the process is the same. You go to a hearing, you plead your case at a hearing, the adjudicator will issue an order, and the tenant will eventually have to leave. There's a lot of discussion about something called cash for keys. I have done cash for keys deals, but cash for keys deals are a business case. They are not something that should be just generally thought of when dealing with it. When it took 2.5 years at the beginning of COVID to get to the tribunal, did it make sense to pay somebody $25,000 or $30,000 to vacate so you could close? Maybe. Right. Now, even with the 6-month delay, it doesn't make sense to pay them anything other than the 1-month compensation, because you're going to, like, the business case on it just doesn't exist. And I would suggest if the purchaser wants vacant possession and won't close without vacant possession, let the purchaser pay. But you as the seller probably shouldn't. That's all I really have to say about that.
I definitely appreciate that. Hart, do you have anything to add?
No, that's definitely Dan's area of expertise. I think just underscoring that the University of Facebook is not the one to turn to, because if you look at the Facebook groups, all you hear about is cash for keys. So definitely consult a paralegal and make sure that you're hiring a realtor that has real estate investment experience through and through, because you'll be much better off.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Well, I really appreciate both of you coming on today and really discussing all of the things that, I wish I knew or you wish you knew before becoming a landlord. And Dan, thank you so much for hopping on and answering our questions regarding the kind of paralegal side of this topic. And Hart, as always, great chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel today. Now, Dan, where is the best place for people to find you if they're looking for a paralegal?
So the best thing to do is go to our website, which is sfg.legal. On our website, there's an interactive contact form that goes to our intake department, and they will certainly disseminate that information to the appropriate people. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm the senior litigator. I litigate. I'm in court 18 days a month. If you send me an email, it's going to take me forever to respond. If you really want something quick, go to sfg.legal. You'll get Samantha Glass. You'll get one of our other intake people, and they will certainly help you on a very quick basis to get the information that you need.
I love that. And Hart, where is the best place for people to find you?
As always, rentpanda.ca, or email us at hello@rentpanda.ca. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of the socials.
Love it. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the channel here live. And hello to all of you who tuned in afterwards and watched the replay here on the Canadian Real Estate channel. Thank you all for being here, and make sure that you smash the like button. It really helps us out and feeds the algorithm, as well as throw us some love in the comment section below. Maybe ask questions that you weren't able to ask live, and we can make sure that we kind of get to a lot of those questions in that comment section, because we do check that. So make sure that you throw us some love in the comment section below. Ask any questions that you have relating to things that you wish you knew before becoming a landlord, or maybe you have some stories to tell. So we would love to see you not miss a single beat here on the channel. So thanks again, Hart. And thank you so much, Dan, for coming onto the Canadian Real Estate channel today. And we will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
We're releasing a video every single day in 2020. We're going to become the content kings of Canadian real estate.